you have similar stuff going on in the Western Indian Ocean as Indians begin to trade with the Roman Empire as well. And the roots of this Roman Empire and what was going on has been left to us in a manual called the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea. Now this is a manual which is fascinating. It's a Greek-Egyptian manual, and it clearly tells us the routes that were taken by merchants coming from the Roman Empire to trade with India. So where did this start off? So there were two starting paths. You could start off either in Alexandria, or you could start off in Tyre or Sidon. If you started off in Alexandria, you could go down the Nile a little bit, and then there was actually a canal which connected the Nile across from what is now Cairo across to somewhere near where the Suez is. So the Suez Canal you see today is not the first version of the Suez Canal. Even thousands of years ago there was a canal. The problem was, of course, it's a sandy area, so every time it was a real problem keeping it clean, but there were several attempts to keep it going. There was another route. You could go further up, down the thing to the first cataract, and then also there was another path to a place called Berenike. You had to cross by camel from the Nile to the coast. That was another route. And then there was another route which I mentioned, which was from Lebanon and what is now Israel area, across through the desert, through the ruins now of Petra. That was why Petra was so rich, because it was a caravan route, and then it reached a place called Aqaba. Anyway, whichever way you came, you ended up in the Red Sea. And then you basically made your way down the Red Sea, trading on either side of it's a thin, narrow sea. So you traded your way down it. Incidentally, the word Erythraean Sea in Greek, Erythraean literally means red, and that's what it really means. Anyway, having made that, they then came up to Yemen. And from Yemen, they made a short hop across to a small island called Socotra. Now, why is it called Socotra? Its origins are incidentally Dvipa Sukhadhara, the island of bliss. And it was full of Indians and Arabs, and it was a major trading point. There are even today all kinds of graffiti left behind by Indian sailors in some of the caves there. And from there, you had a choice. Now, the old route was then to go north to Yemen, along the Baloch coast, and then you went across to Gujarat and so on, and then made your way down south. Now, somewhere in the 1st century AD, some smart guy called Hippolus discovered that you didn't have to do this rather circuitous route. You could use, again, the monsoon winds and sail right across to Kerala. And very quickly, a major port appeared in Kerala called Mucheri or Muziris, which is just a little north of modern-day Cochin. It's in and around Cranganore, in a village actually called Pattanam. They have found a lot of archaeological stuff from that period. So this was suddenly, by certainly the early Roman period, or even before the empire when it was still a republic, major trading routes were being set up. This was the period after the destruction of the great temple of the Jews. A significant Jewish population also came and began to settle along this coast, and so on. So what were these guys trading with each other? Now, the Periplus tells us that the Indians were exporting, among other things, cotton, which was very, very highly prized, especially from the Gujarat area, cotton, iron and steel goods, because as I mentioned, even while iron was an Indian invention, even in much later times, Indian metallurgy was considered of very high quality. So there was all kinds of steel and iron products. And if you were coming from Mucheri area, they were trading spices. Black pepper was particularly important, but also large numbers of spices that were brought in from Southeast Asia, but then made its way to Mucheri, and then the Indians so these Indonesian spices, they made it to the Indians, which were then passed on to the Romans, and so on and so forth. So this was what the Indians were exporting. So what were the Indians importing? Now, among other things, Indians were importing Italian wines. And very importantly, it turns out they were importing women for the royal harems. So this leads us to one of the most important conclusions that we can draw from learning ancient maritime history, which is that even in ancient times, age 3 parties used to involve foreign liquor and foreign escorts. Now this period saw such a lot of trade that it caused a major problem, which was this, that although the Indians were importing lots of women and wine, they were still running a very large current account surplus. Now how do you in an ancient world pay for a current account surplus? You pay for it essentially in gold. And the Romans were handing out so many millions of gold coins that it became a real problem, because if you're pushing out a lot of gold to some other country, then you don't have enough gold in your own country to print coins. And the Roman Empire, by the 2nd century AD, had a serious crisis. And you have in the Senate, people like Pliny and others, really arguing, they have a real problem, don't have enough gold to print our own coins, need to do something about these Indian chaps. So Emperor Vespasian decided that he was going to introduce some sort of a ban on trade with India, and he tried very hard initially. The problem was, of course, both the Indians and the Jews very quickly figured out various smuggling routes, and that whole thing failed. So after a while, they opened up trade again. But the Romans now decided that the way they were going to deal with this was to reduce the amount of gold in their coins. So they began to debase their currencies. Now, what did the Indians do in response? The Indians kept accepting these coins. So when you go to archaeological sites across India, along the coast, you have lots of coins, and depending on which period you go to, the amount of gold keeps diminishing. Of course, it goes up and down depending on the time, but by and large, the amount of coin, the gold content keeps declining.